Here to discuss his proposal on kill switches for smartphones, we have Representative Joe Atkins. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You know, before we get into what your proposal entails, let's talk a little bit more about this issue of the violence that surrounds cell phone stealing, more particularly smartphones. It's becoming a bit more prevalent, according to your press release.
Yeah, well, and it's not according to just me. The FCC now says that almost 1 in 3 robberies across the country involve smartphones. It's one of the most exploding types of crime. And unfortunately, it's taken a turn. Not only was it a monetary, it's like $30 billion now across the country, but they become so violent. In addition, you know, it used to be that they'd snatch your phone and take off. Now they're hitting people over the head, they're beating them up, and then they're stealing their cell phone.
So discuss a little bit how your proposal would work. What is a kill switch, essentially?
Well, and it's a great question because it sounds so sinister. I mean, a kill switch, after all. But a kill switch is essentially just if your phone gets stolen, you can go back to your own home computer, put in your username and password, hit a couple of clicks, and you kill the phone. You turn it into basically a paperweight, which means it no longer has any value. And that's what's prompting the criminals to steal these devices. On the black market in the United States, they can get 30 or 40 or 50 bucks a pop. If they package them up, which is what some of the more organized groups have done, they can sell them in China or Hong Kong for upwards of $200 or more.
Let's talk a little bit more about something that your press release pointed out, that you know, there was a mobile phone manufacturer, Samsung. They did propose installing a kill switch in devices. However, the idea was rejected by a lot of the nation's biggest carriers, and it says reportedly it would cut into the carrier's business of insuring lost or stolen cell phones. So is there any concern that carriers would maybe not sell their products in Minnesota if this bill becomes law?
Well, and actually, you know, I've talked to the carriers. As you imagine, they take quite an interest in this. And I've talked to them both before I talked about the legislation and now afterwards. And I'm encouraging them to do this on their own. I mean, as a competitive advantage to sell handsets, to sell cell phone service. And that's how many of the best changes have taken place. They've originally been proposed in legislative bodies, and then the carriers themselves have decided it's a good idea, good way to grab and score business. But yeah, I think there's going to be some pushback because, and there has been, because they make an awful lot of money on selling insurance for lost and stolen cell phones.
And yet you're having these discussions, so what are you hearing from carriers? Is there, you alluded to pushback, but do you think some are receptive to it?
Actually, you know, just in the last few days, not last few days, last few hours, I've started to hear that they're starting to come up with something of their own. For example, Apple, which controls the software and the hardware side of their device, they put in activation locks. So, which is somewhat akin to this. You can essentially, if your phone gets stolen, you can go back and deactivate it. It's not quite the kill switch, but it certainly is designed to accomplish the same thing, which is make the device less inviting for a criminal to steal.
And so if a device is killed, a smartphone, is it usable in any capacity, or is this going to take away the appetite for anybody to steal it?
Well, and it should completely do away with the appetite to steal it. That's the whole point of it. It depends on the application that's installed. There's some that can temporarily kill it until the user, the owner, reactivates it. There's some that kill it altogether. But the option should at least be there so that Minnesotans have the ability. And all you got to do is look around the University of Minnesota campus, the Mall of America, this rash of crime that has now come to Minnesota, not just the rest of the country, but right here in Minnesota. And it's just an exploding type of crime.
So do you see this perhaps expanding to laptops and tablets as well?
Well, most people don't walk around with their laptop, you know, carried up here. We haven't had that discussion at this point, but right now the target, and they've even named this crime, they call it apple picking. Even though many of the devices now are Android devices, but you're literally holding a $400 or $500 device up next to your head.
Well, and you see that a lot with tablets now, with people taking pictures and walking around with a tablet.
I suspect that's where the discussion may go. At this point, nobody's talked along those lines because I don't think that's as common. And the main thing is we're talking about a law enforcement issue. In California and New York, where this is also being talked about, I think 70% of the crimes in San Francisco now are the stealing of cell phones or smartphones. So it's become a huge law enforcement issue.
And as you're talking about this discussion, U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, she's taking on this issue in Washington. Is it gaining any momentum in Washington? And really, isn't this an issue more for the feds than for state government?
Well, and I'll tell you, I would love it if the feds could. First off, I'd like the industry to deal with it themselves. If they can't, it'd be great if you could do a 50-state approach. But unfortunately, not a lot is happening in Washington, D.C. these days. And I applaud Senator Klobuchar for taking the lead on it. But everything is kind of ground to a halt out in D.C. So at the state level, what we've been doing since what's going on in D.C. is we have started working together. So we're working with New York and California. A lot of other states, especially middle states, follow what Minnesota does, because we tend to be a little bit more reasonable and thoughtful how we approach things.
With session coming up, what kind of discussions have you had with members on this? Are they receptive?
Oh my, it's probably the most positive reception I've had to legislation, not just from members, but I'm getting folks that are looking up my email address or looking up my phone number online so that they can call me and tell me what a great idea it is. Both Democrats and Republicans, but also lots of folks that are outside of the Capitol.
Do you think this might result in a spike in the old-fashioned flip phones?
I don't know that we're ever going to see those days come back, but we still have one at my house. We were joking about it'd be great to see on the Antique Roadshow and find out what it's worth. But
we have a coworker who subscribes to his as well and loves it. So anyway, thank you for joining us, Representative Atkins. As always, we appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.